Hello, I thought today I'd go through my airbrush kit, my booth, the compressor, the tools and everything that I use, and some little kind of tips and tricks that I use for keeping things flowing, because airbrushing can be a pain when things get clogged up. And you end up looking at stuff and going, why isn't the paint coming out? I've just put the new reservoir, filled it up, I've flushed it, but I'm still not getting anything. So I'll just talk through what I do to get around those kind of issues, and just generally all the kit I've got and how I approach it. You have to basically have a slight kind of zen-like patience to this stuff, because it's not as easy as just painting miniatures straight up. There's certainly a lot more involved in terms of understanding how you keep things clean and how you sort of maintain things between each time you flush some paint through. And I'll tell you how I do it. And I think it's now about 15 years or 16 years I've been airbrushing, so I've gone through cycles of love-hate with this, bought new brushes, left it for a while and then come back to it. But now I think I'm in a comfortable position with it, so I shall talk about it. And yeah, it's at the back of my room. I've got a window behind. I can open the window and I put the extractor fan's hose out of there temporarily, so it kind of hangs out the window when I'm using the extractor. And beside me I put my miniatures and bits and pieces here. The actual booth itself, I'll keep my brushes on the stand here. I mean, that's the first vital tip actually, is having a stand, because if you imagine with these things, even though you've got a lid on the top, it's and if you're getting into airbrushing first of all and you think, okay, what am I going to do? What do I need? I mean, a stand is vital, because I found early on you're always like sort of leaning things on places and thinking, where am I going to put that? And so even with the lid, you don't want to really be tipping these on their side, because if you tip this airbrush on its side, the paint just gets all on inside of the lid. It just becomes very messy. So just in terms of gear I've got here, so this is an Iwata HP M1, and it's a single action. And by that, it means it's kind of good for beginners and kind of workhorse usage, really, because you set the paint flow, which adjusts the needle at the front, at the back, and you set that once, and then you're just addressing the airflow with the top here. So the harder down you push, the more air you get through. And doing that makes it easy to learn, because you're not having to do multiple pullbacks and push downs. So that's a good workhorse one, and I have a quick release underneath too. It's an Iwata quick release, and it just means that you can just put have a single hose to your compressor and then switch here. So that's quite a good way of doing things. If I show you my other airbrush, now I've got this for my 40th, almost 10 years to the day, and it's still going strong. It's a great airbrush, which is the Iwata HPC Plus. And there you can see that I have that quick release underneath, and you can just pop your airbrush on and it clips in. I mean, that's so easy to use. I haven't got the compressor on at the moment, but yeah, it means you can switch with the compressor on, and you're not doing this sort of thing where you're unscrewing it and having air go all over the place if you happen to have some compression left in your compressor with air in the system. So that's relatively simple to switch between the two. Now this airbrush, unlike the M1, this is dual, what they call dual action on the trigger. So with this one, you're just changing the air flow by pushing down harder, but you can change the paint flow with the needle by setting it on the back dial. Whereas this one, you've got both the airflow and the paint flow. Combination of when you push down, you're getting more air. When you pull back, you're opening up the paint flow. So you can essentially, the position way at the back and all the way down means you just get a ton of paint splashing out. So yeah, it's just a little bit more to learn, because you have to be sort of quite strong actually in the finger department to both hold it just at the position you want. So it's a little bit more to learn, but otherwise it's great. So I'm diving off into different subjects, but I will get back to the booth. Just thought I'd start with the main event, which is the airbrush itself. So yeah, 10 years good use out of this, and I've never really had any major issues. I've bought 3 new needles for it in 10 years, because early on I think I was probably a little bit rough. with my airbrush, but how close can I get in on that? But there you go, that's the needle end business on there, and they're very, very easy to bend. You only really need to sort of accidentally, if you just went dunk, that's it, ruined. Now the thing is, when I first started, I was not as gentle as I could be, and I used to sometimes do things like grab a piece of tissue paper and then see that there was some paint clogged on the end of the needle and just sort of rub it off and things like that. And I can say now that was probably how I bent, and also with my deconstruction and cleaning, I might not be so gentle, so I'd unscrew the back, pull the needle out, and when I was putting it back in, I'd go, oh, it's resisting. Somehow I wasn't pushing the needle through the trigger, because the trigger in the base of it has a little hole in it, and I probably went dunk dunk when I was pushing through, and that will just take out the needle. But you do have to have very good eyesight to see when a needle's gone, because it's a very tiny fine point, and it'll be frustrating when it goes, but when it does, you can sort of see it, and then once you've seen it, you put your finger on it, you can actually feel a little kink in the end. One last thing to say about this particular airbrush is that I've changed, if you have a look, the anatomy of an airbrush has a crown on the end, and this is the crown. And interesting, when I first heard of it, I thought crown, it doesn't look like a crown, whereas this one does look like a crown. And I'll see how close I can get in on that. You can see it has that, for want of a better word, crenellations in the top that make it into a crown type shape, and you understand why it's called a crown. Now the reason I've got this one here, this didn't actually come with the airbrush, but I was told from reading a guide that if you have the holes in the proper crown like this one, rather than the standard which you get on this, which is just it just looks more like a nozzle than having any kind of holes in the top. But what that means is when you get up close to a subject, the closer you get with one which doesn't have the gaps in the crown, the air pushes back against, and you get a kind of a draft back, flow back effect, which disrupts the flow of the paint. So if you want to get close in, like we do if you're doing miniature painting and hobby stuff, get one of the crowns with the crenellations. But normally, sometimes they come standard on airbrush. This one, it wasn't standard. I had to invest in this separately, and they're not cheap. It probably was about, I don't know, $20, £15, something in that order, probably for that when I bought it a few years ago, so that I could get closer in without fear of the air pushing back as much. So yeah, they're on the side and connected by a braided style hose, which goes down to my compressor. So this is not the best of views of my compressor, but it's the name is a Bambi, B-A-M-B-I, Bambi compressor. I think they're a British brand, although probably the gear's probably made in China, who knows. It has a valve so you can adjust the amount of airflow here, and it gives you an idea of what that is on the front, and you generally keep it right near the bottom and quite low for model airbrushing. And this big bottle at the bottom is the compressor reservoir. So what that means is that when you turn it on, go around the back of it around here so you can see what's happening amongst all of the junk. You pull up that switch to turn it on, and it starts the compression process from there. So if I pull up that, you can hear essentially what it's doing is filling the reservoir below. And then that sort of means the air is ready to come out of the airbrush itself. And now you can see that crown again on the front, which means that the air doesn't get forced back as badly if you're going in close to the subject. So it does start working straight away, so even though I've just basically turned it on, it's already pumping full the reservoir, and it will in a moment it'll stop once the reservoir is full. And you then slowly work your way down through the air in there silently, because it's a silent one. So I'll just leave that compressor filling up there on the reservoir, and probably in a moment you hear a clunk as it stops filling the reservoir and it's ready to go. So this is my airbrush booth. So basically it has a couple of sides that are made of this sort of plastic material, quite lightweight, that sits on the sides, provide an area for the air to sort of be drawn through towards the screen, and the filter. And the filter at the back there, I'm due to put a new filter in. I've got some on order actually, because you do need to change those every few months. And the model I've got is a bench vent. And if I can find out, then the other key things to have is is a mask. This one is I don't know what the brand is actually, GVS mask. So that's just the face mask, and this is what I mostly use and sort of breathe in through these filters on the side there. And I do also have a big old one with the face visor on as well, and this is a famous, well-known, I think they're German brand, Sunstrom. And the filters go in the front there, and there's different filters you can get. So you may have noticed that's the airbrush reservoir pumped full, and it just works automatically down there. It will start to pump that airbrush full again once I've used up the reservoir. So when I'm sat here spraying away and it's silent because it's full reservoir down there, eventually it will kick in again when I've used up enough, and it starts to pump it full again. So yeah, jumping back to the Sunstrom, I bought this second hand on eBay. You know, builders and workers use these for dust safety, and yeah, you just put the new filter. I'm due to get a new filter in there really on the front too. I don't use it much in the summer months, but I will use it if I'm doing some heavy spraying of a lot of like priming or something. I just don't want it in my eyes or anything. I'll use that. If I'm doing light work, I'll probably usually just put this on. Key problem with this big visor as well, if you're thinking of going this direction, is that in addition to getting hot in it, it's hard to keep your glasses on in there. I found I was fiddling around trying to keep the glasses in position with the seal on the side rubbing into the glasses. Otherwise, to hand, other things I've got some masks here which I use. There's a variety of different ones I might spray through, and these have some different patterns on there for either technical for sci-fi stuff, or some like lizard skin things you can use on spiders and dragons and anything really. Those are from this company. I happen to have one with the details on. HD stencil system from Anakin Models. So that's a nice little hex grid one, and you can see £11 for that. So they're not cheap, but they are reusable, and I do use them. That one I haven't used, the small one, but you know, I have used these other ones before, and they're great for putting patterns onto things. So that's the other thing sitting around here. And then of course the actual hose goes out of the window there, which is a bit of an annoyance in the colder weather, that you have to open the window to put the extractor out, but that's generally safer to do that, to get the any of the air that's sucked through the screen out of the window itself. So, and of course lighting is important as well. I happen to have a light here from a company called Newer. You can't really see the logo on the side there very well, but it's yeah, Newer LED video light, and Newer is spelled Neewer. It's Chinese stuff, I think, and you can put big Sony style batteries in the back if you like, but I just use a mains controller, and you can sort of change the light from cool to a sort of a warmer style on there. So I have that to just give me plenty of light on what I'm doing. It's kind of got a plastic diffuser on the front. It doesn't really get hot, it's a little bit warm. And then I have a Manfrotto bracket here, Manfrotto just as an arm with the light on it. It just allows me to position that in a way that means it's sort of aiming down on the work at hand. I used to also sometimes put a light in the top also, so I sort of put light down through here too, or I've at one point mounted a camera that was had its lens just directly down into there. It allowed me to sort of film inside the booth. I haven't been doing that more recently, but yeah, that was just another thing that I did, which is why I've got a strange hole here which I've now sort of sealed up because I had the camera pointing through. But that's something I don't do anymore. I tend to just film with a camera sort of at the side here when I'm doing any video work for YouTube. So here in the actual booth itself, I can show you a few of the supplies and materials that I always use, which are sort of standard for me and I keep to hand, which are most useful things. So this is an absolute vital tip, and the reason for that is because I see lots of people talking about how they clean their airbrush out in between different paints and also at the end of a session. And quite often they do things like they'll suggest putting your finger on the end and pressing the button so that the air can't get out and then all the bubbles come up inside there to clean it. And that's kind of okay, although I don't think it's manufacturer recommended you do it. But what I do is I just get the pump spray, which I'll bring that old bottle thing over, and I spray directly into the reservoir really hard and firm, and that will get most acrylic paint out. So that's done at the point where you're nearly dry, or you might have a little bit of paint left in the reservoir in between jobs, and I'll just pump that out a few times, and the pressure from the spray is obviously enough to clear the gunk and the paint out of the bottom, and I then pour it into here. When I first started airbrushing, I saw all these things about these pots that you can get where you kind of put a load of cleaner. I use this, there's another quick ingredient thing I've got there. I use the Vallejo airbrush cleaner, does the job. I used to, when I started, even if there was some paint and gunk in there, I might pour it out, but then there'd still be a bit left, and then I'd pour the cleaner in, and then I would spray the cleaner through. And that was really after seeing videos and materials, because you can actually buy a pot like this, which is designed to have a bracket on. You put the airbrush on, and then it just constantly sprays all of its junk out and through. But I found that was just causing me more blockages, because I was pumping more paint through, and as soon as that cleaning fluid hits some acrylic, it turns it into a kind of a goopy gunk. And as you can imagine, spraying that through the tiny spaces in your airbrush results in some challenges, because you end up with that gunk getting caught around things inside, around the needle and the tip. So my number one tip really is use a handy pumper, not necessarily this scenic spray model, but use a pump like this to spray into your reservoir to get any paint. And what you'll find is once you've pumped that in, it's quite high pressure even though you're pushing it from your hand, you'll find it's cleaned mostly everything out. Your paint's gone. And many times I don't even have to put cleaner through if I'm in the middle of a job. I'll just spray the pump through, splash it out, spray it through just a little bit the leftover water just to clear the water out of there, and I'm nearly ready to go most of the time. But if it is still really clogged up or there's some muck in there, then I would go for this. So the other thing while you're cleaning on a job and you're in the middle of airbrushing is to always have some brushes to hand, because as I said right at the beginning, I've had a couple of accidents with needles bending over the years, even though it's just the tiniest tip bent. So now if I'm trying to clean off the actual needle, I'll just do a sort of very gentle clean in there, and I might, if it's a particularly stubborn bit of paint on the end of the on the end of the needle, I may either use a little bit of warm water if I've got some warm water to hand, or some of the cleaning airbrush cleaner, just get some on the brush and then just sort of swill it around in there gently, just to avoid doing anything daft like grabbing towel, paper towel, and then pinching the needle, because that will just end up with a bend eventually. because they're too fine. So yeah, I would just use a little brush with some warm water or some cleaning fluid on there, just to sort of get any gunk off the end of the needle. So on that subject, that's why I have some sort of clean water, sometimes warm, and I leave it in one of these jars at the back here. And that warm water sometimes is just enough to shift some paint, and particularly inside the reservoir as well. So if you've got inside the reservoir, if you've got some bits of paint and things left in there, sometimes a bit of warm water on the brush will clear it off. If not, then maybe a little bit of the cleaner. So yeah, that's just about being gentle with it, and preserving that needle really is the use of the brush, plus the use of the hand sprayer to spray inside here to clean out stuff is just brilliant, and it saves you all of that sort of weird stuff that you have to do, and you see where people spray a load of gunk through for a very long time. It doesn't always necessarily require that if you can just pump it out quickly. Otherwise, I mix paint, and I use these little glass jars. Yes, I've got a little set of them on the side here, and they clean out very easily. These are from a company called Duralex. They're French glass, and at the end of a painting session it's very easy to use some warm water to flush out, and then they're ready for mixing again next time. Now, manufacturers, of course, do actually suggest that you mix in the reservoir on the top. You don't have to mix your paint separately in a glass jar and then pour it into here. You can just pour all of your bits and pieces into the reservoir on the top and stir it around in there. And this one's got a larger reservoir, so you can go for longer with this once the paint's in there. I use this Liquitex Airbrush Medium, and that's my sort of go-to at the moment for mixing up paint. It seems to work with all paints, so I put Vallejo through there and Life Colour, and this is a Game Air from Vallejo, which I use those. Plus I use the soft body acrylics from Liquitex. I will squirt a bit one of these out so you can see how thick it is. Yeah, so this soft body acrylic, really nice strong pigments, and you can mix them up. But yeah, you can just squirt out a little tiny bit, and it's not as firm as paint that comes in a tube, but it is very thick, and that's why I would then get some of the Liquitex acrylic medium. Tends to have a bad nozzle on this, but pour that in there. Then I've got this to then mix together, and you can see to start with it doesn't look too great in terms of the mixing, but eventually as you stir around you get a really good blend. That one there, I probably put a few too many drops of the acrylic medium in, but it's now, you know, thin and ready to go in an airbrush. And I would just pour that into the reservoir from there, and I might mix in some other colours at the same time. And you know, typically I get it to sort of a 1:4 ratio of the paint. If I was Vallejo, I might do 1:4 or 1:3 ratio between one of the paint to sort of 3 parts of the Liquitex medium, or even the Vallejo medium, which I've also used. And then you get a kind of a milky, easy to run and dripping style of paint to go in the airbrush. Yes, that's a very quick. Yeah, 2 ways of approaching that really. I've done both. I've sometimes mixed in here. If I'm doing something like priming or putting a large base layer down on some models, I might mix in the reservoir. Now mixing again, old brush, vital, because you can just get in there and just swill it around, and the brush will allow you to stir up and clean off any bits of, you know, gummy paint that needs a little bit of help to mix. So yeah, just have loads of old paintbrushes left around because they're just handy to do stirring and mixing, and for cleaning as well. So yep. As you can see with this small amount of paint I mixed up there, there's not much, and that's always my tip is don't put much in. If you fill up one of these reservoirs here with paint, you can see it's nearly like it's half a bottle of paint in there, and when you're painting small sci-fi and fantasy miniatures, you just don't need that much paint. Unless you had like a huge army that you were doing a primer colour on, I tend to always just keep a small amount in the bottom. Otherwise you end up thinking things like, oh well, I've only used a third of that and I don't want to waste my paint, and you're pouring it in and out, and it's just a mess. So my tip is to go sparingly and don't really fill the reservoir up more than just a small layer at the bottom. These all look a bit glossy at the moment because the reason for that is because they had a gloss coat on this set of models during the process of doing the Zenithal highlights on them. I have a stage where I airbrush a gloss varnish over everything, and it just allows me to put an oil wash on as an in-between stage, and that oil wash gives me a lot of this kind of dark shading. So if I pick one of these out and show you what I mean by that, this miniature is itself on, you can see the sheen on there from the gloss, but you can also see that the black oil wash has gone into all of the darker areas of the miniature's armour, and this is now ready for some paint. I will airbrush on a colour onto the front of that shield, and the Zenithal highlighting with the white at the top and the dark from the oil wash at the bottom will show through a thin layer of paint and give you some pre-shading. Yep, so that's why they're glossy as well, because that gloss coat goes on and then the oil does a sort of a pin wash style. It goes into all of the narrow crevices because the gloss allows it to sort of run very smoothly with no resistance. That's an old Elric model with a different shield than what he came with from Games Workshop. So that's it. Thanks for listening in and checking out my kit. Hopefully there's been a few tips in there that have been useful for you, and if you've got other tips, please let me know in the comments and tell me what you do to make your airbrushing nice and easy. What's your setup like to keep the workflow running for you?